Brad, as always, great to see your face on the Coach Up here. Today, we're going to be talking about rituals and routines. I think the wellness space is, let's say, oversaturated with rituals and routines. And it can be, because it's such a cluttered space now, it can be hard to know what makes for a good routine. But you have some hard and fast rules, or I guess not hard and fast, because nothing's ever hard and fast. We like flexibility. But you have some good guidelines and guardrails. So let's walk through what you think makes for a good routine.
All right. This sounds great. The first thing that I would say as a frame to this whole conversation is that routines are very powerful. They are, in fact, very beneficial. Most high performers, whether it's in sport, in the creative arts, in business, in science, in medicine, they have routines. So routines work. What I think a lot of the dialogue gets wrong is that there are better routines than others, or there's like a certain best routine. And as I'll discuss in a bit, the best routine is going to look very different for me, for you, for me at different points of time in my life, as it will for just about anyone. So routines are the best, but there's no best routine is a guiding principle. With that said, the first rule when I think about a solid routine is to know your chronotype. And this is just the scientific term for whether you're a morning person or an evening person. And there is a very real biological basis to this. It's about 50-50, so it actually falls on a bell curve. It's a normal distribution. And some people are just fresher and more focused and more able to zoom in and get really deep in the morning. And other people tend to do their best work and their best thinking in the evening, later parts of the day. And I think that a good routine starts there because as you're thinking about pairing certain tasks with your naturally occurring energy levels, to the extent you can, you want to take advantage of your chronotype. So if you're a morning person or early in the day person, you probably want your most demanding work to be loaded up in the early part of the day. Whereas if you are more of an evening person, again, to the extent possible, you might want some of that demanding work to fall later on in the afternoon.
You got to be a morning person, I would imagine.
I am a morning person. And what that means for me is that I try to keep my mornings as clear as possible of meetings and other conflicts. I don't go to the gym until after I'm done putting in a block of work. I know I have some flexibility because I'm my own boss, essentially. I work from home. A question that I always get asked is, well, if I'm in an office, I can't just schedule everything around my chronotype. And of course not, that's right. But to the extent that you can, you want to just try to have in mind, like, what are my naturally occurring energy levels and the ebb and flow, and how can I try to match activities to the energy levels that I have at various points of the day? I try to do my best work in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I schedule more like conversational work. So recording podcasts, doing presentations, that sort of thing, because I draw energy from the people that I'm with. And I'm not as reliant on my own need for internal energy to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think the one solution that might be a solution for some people, may not be a solution for other people, depending on your boss and how your workplace works, is just if you need some time in the morning, maybe you set a 90-minute block on your calendar so that no one schedules a meeting during that time. Again, some people that's not going to work. If your boss is the type to look at your calendar and go, I don't care what's on there, I'm scheduling a meeting when I need it, it's not going to work. But like in my old job when I was at GQ, people would respect that. And so you can block that time off if you need.
Yeah, I think that it's always going to be a spectrum, right? With different work situations, different bosses, different colleagues. So this isn't about being perfect. It's about, again, to the extent you can, blocking off time to do certain kind of tasks and activities when your energy level is naturally right for those.
What's your next rule?
My next rule is to pair spaces, objects, and specific activities. So physical objects in our surroundings can help elicit certain behaviors. An example could be if you go to a specific coffee shop at a specific time and you use the same computer to write, then when you go to that coffee shop and sit down to write, it's easier to groove into writing. We've talked about this before on the podcast. The brain is very predictive, and it uses its context and what's happening around it to get itself into gear to act. So if you can pair activities with certain context and surroundings and repeat those behaviors, you're essentially giving your brain an on-ramp into the task at hand. This is why athletes go through warm-up routines. Yes, in some sports, part of the warm-up is to actually get your muscles warm and elevate your heart rate. But a lot of it is it's just a predictable series of tasks that an athlete can progress through, whether at the state championship, the national championship, their home gym, whether they're in Paris for the Olympics, it doesn't matter. They can take their warm up with them, and it tells their mind body system, all right, it's time to perform, and it helps them settle into the groove necessary to do just that.
I even find like, and granted, this depends on your situation, what your apartment or your house looks like, but I can find that working in different areas in my living space, I can actually do better work in, like when I'm writing, I like to be in a bit more of a place with like a little bit more light. So I tend to go outside my bedroom, but if I'm doing reading, I kind of like feeling cozy. So I'll be in my bedroom. So it's also sort of like you were talking about with Chronotype, figuring out what energies, not to get too woo, but like what energies of what spaces correlate with what activities, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's woo for good reason, because sometimes woo is true, and we should coin that. Sometimes woo is true.
Like that.
And all the research would say the same. Again, everyone's different. We all have like our unique endowment of neurochemistry, and some people do their best work with music. Some people need silence. Some people need the cafe noise in the background. Some people need a white noise machine. Some people do their best work in really light spaces. For other people, that's overstimulating and too much for their brain, and they do their best work with dim light. So none of these are perfect. None of these are the best. You have to figure out what's the best for you. And then the work is trying to pair those surroundings, those settings, those pre-performance rituals with an activity so that over time, your brain can groove into the task at hand. It really does make a big difference. I think about this in three ways. I think about syncing time with activities, syncing space with activities, and syncing objects with activities.
I like that. I also think that's applicable to, it's more universally applicable than it would have been pre-pandemic, because a lot of people didn't go back to the office, right? So you actually can choose where you're doing your remote work from. Some people, obviously, teachers, surgeons don't have that liberty, but a lot more people, I think, do than did before the pandemic. All right, what's up next?
So next is nail the universal basics. And what I mean by this is there are certain behaviors that are almost incontestably effective for everyone. And I think of four here: exercise, sleep, natural light, and social engagement. Now, what's important is there's no optimal time, place, or way to engage in these behaviors. Again, you got to figure out what works for you and do it. But regular exercise, regular and sufficient sleep, making sure that you get some natural light throughout the day, and having some social engagement. We know from decades of research, these things help us to feel our best and to perform our best. Now, where I differ from some other notable people, most notably the podcaster Andrew Huberman, he's very exacting, especially on the natural light, right? Like it should be low angle morning sunlight. It should be within 90 minutes of waking up, on and on and on. I've seen some studies in mice that suggest that timing that sunlight to within 90 minutes of waking up in a certain angle can help regulate a rodent circadian rhythm. But I've yet to see that in humans. And even in the rodent studies, there's a lot of extrapolation based on hormones being released at certain times. So I am much less of an exactitude person on this. What I do know is that getting outside and getting natural light is good for you. It's good for your mood, and it is good for your sleep-wake cycles. But needing to time it to a specific angle of the sun, I've just yet to see any evidence that suggests that makes any difference. So I wanted to double down on that because I know there's like this thing about low angle morning sunlight, and I just don't think it's important. My rule would be try to get outside, and ideally in the first half of the day. Exercise, same thing. Try to get exercise in earlier in the day. There's some research that suggests it makes a lot of sense that if you exercise right before bed, it can arouse your system. It makes it harder to fall asleep. However, exercising late in the day is better than not exercising at all. And I know plenty of people who exercise after work and have no problem sleeping. And then social engagement is, we've talked about ad infinitum here at the Growth Equation, is so important for mental health, for physical health, for emotional health. And if you have a routine that does not include interacting with other people, then I would try to get that into your routine. And That doesn't have to mean being a social butterfly. That can literally just mean going to work at a coffee shop where your only interaction is there are other people in the space and you order a coffee and you say hi to the barista. But that goes such a long way to help us feel rooted where we are. We evolve to feel rooted where we are based on our connections to other people. And a hindrance of optimization cultures and routines is that our routines get so specific that we crowd out time to be with other people, and that backfires.
Yeah, I like that. Doesn't mean you have to be going to happy hour or bingo or trivia every night. Just
no, it's just like be around with other people. And especially if you work from home, it's easy to fall into like a Uber optimization trap. I get this. I wrote about this for New York Magazine before the pandemic, before remote work was a thing for everyone. And when I became a professional writer and I left a workplace to be writing, and this was back when like I was far from having made it, and I'm just cranking out stories for any publication that will pay me. And I started to feel really lonely because like I wouldn't go to the coffee shop because I'd be like, I don't want to interrupt my writing groove. Or I wouldn't make plans with another writer because I'd be like, I should be reading in that time because I just need to like pump out writing for the internet. And I was super freaking productive. I wrote a ton of articles for Outside of New York Magazine, but I got really lonely. And I'll tell you what cured my loneliness. It wasn't going to happy hour. It was literally forcing myself to walk to the coffee shop at the same time every day. That's all it took, like a 20-minute walk. And I was no less efficient. So we tell ourselves these stories that are often not true about efficiency.
And then you have one or two more rules here, I believe?
That's right. Great. My other rules are to experiment and embrace individuality. So remember that, and I sound like a broken record, but it's important, even the most popular components of routines that we read about on the computer or in books, they affect different people differently. So a couple examples. Some people perform better while listening to music, others do not. Some people get a boost from caffeine. Others experience restlessness or an upset stomach with caffeine. Meditating before bed is super calming for some people, and for other people, it is super anxiety provoking. So again, these are like common fixtures of routine that have these very polarized effects depending on our individual temperament and our own genetic endowment. So when you hear something that is supposed to be a part of a routine, unless it's exercise, sleep, social engagement, or natural light, I would question the veracity and I would experiment and try to figure out what works for you. And then my final rule is don't become overly attached to your routine, because life is going to do what life does. And there will be times when it's impossible for you to stick to your routine. It could be when you're traveling. It could be if your special coffee shop closes. It could be if whatever elixir you order from your podcast goes out of business. You won't know what to do. And you'll feel like, oh my gosh, I can't be productive, or I can't get the best of myself because I can't engage in my routine. And then that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the first rule of routines is to develop one and stick with it. And the second rule of routines is to cultivate the ability to release from it when needed.
It's great. I think that is a wonderful, I got 5 rules there. So I'm going to try to run back through them really quick just to sum them up for the listeners. Before we get in the rules, general thought: routines work. Routines are the best, but there is no best routine. So make sure you figure out what works for you. 1, know your chronotype. Are you a morning person or an evening person? 2, pair spaces with activities. Your brain likes context. So if you can do a certain activity in a certain space, it gives it an on-ramp, which makes it easier to get into the task. 3, nail the basics, which are exercise, sleep, natural light, social engagement. 4, sort of going back to the top, but embrace individuality. What works for one other person that you read about online may not work for you. 5, don't become overly attached. If you get too rigorous and too tight, then when something unexpected happens, it can be hard to stick to your routine, and you don't want to be so rigid that you can't get anything done. Similar to that, all I would add is like think in terms of ingredients rather than recipes. Like instead of doing the same exact thing every day, think of, to go back to Brad's third point, what are the basics? What are the sort of ingredients for a good day that I need? And then figure out what works for you. But this has been great. Thank you, Brad, for these rules. If you listeners have any other ideas on routines and rituals, please write in to clay.growtheq@gmail.com and let us know how you think through routines and rituals. But hopefully there has been at least a few rules in here that you have found helpful. And thank you for joining us on this Coach Up. We'll talk to you later in the week. As always, farewell.